So we have a little tutorial here about the pistol squat. Pistol squat is something that my body is still figuring out how to do. So my demonstrations will be one of on the journey. But that puts me in a really good position actually to give you guys some tips on it, because sometimes when a movement it just happens in our body with ease, we're just born with the natural ability to make it happen. We haven't really understood the building blocks and the steps to get towards it. So come join me on the journey. Let's figure out how we can start to approach this shape and the workarounds that might help us to integrate this movement into our other movement practices. So I'm going to just make use of the windowsill so that I can demonstrate a pistol squat. So essentially a pistol squat is with one leg out, and you squat all the way down and all the way up. That's a pistol squat. So what are the key components? One of the major aspects, mobility-wise, is going to be at the ankle. So this is dorsiflexion and this is plantar flexion. I always remember P for point. And in this shape, in pistol squat, you're in a deep dorsiflexion. The lower you go down, the more you bend your knees, the more the angle at the front of the ankle creates that deep dorsiflexion. And at the bottom of the pistol squat, where you had one leg forwards, the other ankle, so I'll show you the other leg, this ankle here needs to be in a deep dorsiflexion. So this is one key aspect that we can spend some time working on. So anything that you can do that helps to drive the knee forwards and gradually start to open up the back of the ankle. Quite a nice way to measure it is if you have a wall, to come up towards the wall and you bring your toes up against the edge of the wall and then you push your knee in and you just judge that mobility, and then you move your foot further back and see if you can get the knee in towards the wall, and you find that point of bind where you run out of mobility, you can no longer get your knee towards the wall, and that can be quite a nice way to start to slowly train that movement in. Sometimes people believe that it's dangerous to send the knee beyond the ankle. It's not. It's a totally safe and normal movement. It happens all the time during your general daily movement, so don't be afraid of that movement at all. So that's one key component. And the Achilles tendon, which is this large, you can feel it with your own hand, it's really very strong and meaty. This large tendon on the back of the ankle is so strong. I've read in a few bits of anatomy literature that it can be compared to cast iron, it's that strong. So realistically, are we going to be able to stretch more mobility into it? Perhaps, perhaps not. What we can think more of is just optimizing what ankle mobility we do have and accepting the rest. For example, if I keep my legs parallel and I show you how low I can go with my heels on the floor, it's about here. Then my heels need to lift off. Essentially, that's my Achilles tendon. Some people are able to get into this deep crouch with their heels on the floor quite easily. And this is why I made use of holding onto the wall, because to get my heels down, the weight is so far back, I need to be holding on to something. When we talk about the modifications and the workarounds, I'll show you this variation again. So that's one key component, is improving your dorsiflexion in your ankle. Another key component here is that we end up in a deep knee flexion. So a deep knee flexion, this is flexion of the knee, extension of the knee. And at the bottom of that pistol squat, you are in a deep knee flexion. Do you have the mobility for a deep knee flexion? And do you also have the tolerance of that soft tissue compression? So that's just something to be practicing in a very simple way. You could spend time doing compression and deep knee flexion, all sorts of different practices that would bring that in. The other key component was the deep hip flexion. So in both hips, you have hip flexion. In the foot that stays on the floor, we end up in this deep hip flexion here, and then you need the strength to lift out and find hip extension. So that whole hip complex needs to be really strong. And in a lifted leg, again you have hip flexion, but you need the strength to hold the leg up in hip flexion as you descend down, to keep this hip flexor really strong, to keep the leg straight and off the floor, and to keep it there as you rise up again. So this is a strong movement for the whole hip complex, both the hip flexors on the way down and the hip extensors on the way up of the supporting leg. So anything you can do that will be training the hip flexors, and with an extended knee, so that you get the whole quadricep involved. Another key component here is spinal flexion. And if you go to a lot of yoga asana classes, you're going to be really used to all of the cues about lengthening your spine. And a lot of people who do yoga asana as their primary movement practice actually have a little bit of an imbalance in that they have underdeveloped spinal flexors perhaps, or they're just not giving so much attention into their spinal flexion muscles. This is spinal flexion, the rounding, and the muscles that create spinal flexion are on the front of the abdomen. For example, your rectus abdominis, it's a strong spinal flexor. So doing some movements that help you to train your spinal flexors could be really useful. For example, movements like this, where you are actively looking to flex your spine, and then you can add in the extended knee hip flexion, so that you also start to train the lifted leg with the spinal flexion. So if you're used to doing a lot of yoga asana, and you perhaps often do navasana, boat pose, in this shape we're not training the spinal flexors, but if you made it flexed at the spine, it would be more useful for your pistol squat. So that's another key component. And then another one is balance. It takes a lot of balance to be able to lower down and lift all the way back up again. So what can we do to help ourselves start to get towards this shape? One really nice method is to hold on to something, which is what I was doing to demonstrate. So by holding on to something next to you, lifting up one leg, reach the other arm forward for balance, start to bend your standing knee and flex your spine, lean forward, reach forwards, and then we find the depth of the shape. And that way I'm getting the hip compression and getting the strength in the hip flexors of the lengthened leg, and then really drive into the foot to push yourself all the way up. By holding on here, I was able to pull on that a little bit to help me stand, so it helped me with my strength, but also it took out the knees to have all of the mobility at the ankle. So that could be a really nice option. Another thing that you can practice, particularly if you do already have the ankle mobility, is coming down. I'm going to make use of the wall because I don't have the ankle mobility, but coming down into a low crouch position, and then see from here if you can lift the leg, and spend a bit of time there, and then see if you can lift the other leg. And if you can do this without holding on, have a go at that. Another really nice way is if you have a bath, you might find that you can get into the pistol squat position in the bath. The water just creates a bit of buoyancy, and it helps to keep your body a little bit supported so that you can practice lifting off the leg. You might not be able to stand up in the bath, but at least you can practice the shape. Often in an asana practice, when we do a squat, we have the feet wide and external rotation at the hips. So something you can start to do to train the ankle mobility and make it a little bit more pistol squat training wise is to slowly start to turn your feet more parallel and draw the knees in. So the opposite cue, normally it's feet wide, press the knees wide, but you could try feet forward and draw the knees in. And that way you really start to train the ankle mobility. Reach the arms forwards, and gradually you might find that you're able to bring your knees more and more parallel. Literally practicing squats, that's going to be a really good way as well, so that you descend down into the very depths, as low as you can possibly get, and then you push all the way back up again. And you can see that in my body, to find the squat, the feet are quite wide and the knees are out. Descend all the way down and push to come all the way up. But to make it more relevant for the pistol squat, you might start to make your feet a little bit more parallel and allow your spine to round. Don't be afraid of spinal flexion. So you allow that curl. You can see that that way the feet are a little bit more relevant for the pistol squat shape, and then gradually start to make it more parallel. So now I've gone absolute parallel. Let's see how low I can get. With a rounded spine. And you could see probably from the concentration and the slight juddery nature of the movement that for me that's probably the point of bind. And then if I start to bring the feet even closer together, what's likely to happen at the bottom is a little rock backwards. That's still a really good way to practice it. So arms forward, you start to bend your knees, allow the rounding in the spine. There's the floor. And then push to come all the way up. And then you can start to do that same rocking motion with one leg forwards. So you could start to come as if you were going to pistol squat. Use a little rock. And see if you can use the rock to get all the way up. As much of a rock as you need. So here are some really nice ways that you can start to work towards your pistol squat. Another way, perhaps you want to work more on the hip flexor and a little bit less on the squat action. One leg lengthened, one knee bent. Reach your arms forward, round your spine as if you were in your pistol squat, and now lift off the straight leg. Spinal flexion, hip flexion. And this is a shape in which to build endurance. How long can you stay there? And not only does it require strength on the top, but it requires length underneath. Always when one side is strengthening, the other side is lengthening. So that's another really key aspect is, do you need to stretch your hamstrings? Another option that you could explore would be to get yourself a stool. This is a bit of an unusual yoga stool, but there it is. And practice your pistol squat coming to a lesser degree. So could you do some single leg squats down and up on a stool? And this is a really functional movement. This is going to be a useful movement for anybody, because when you lose the ability to get up and down from a chair, that really starts to impede on your quality of life. So although a pistol squat might seem a bit of a lofty goal for some people, the steps that we take towards it, the training strategies, could still be beneficial for many. So ankle mobility, knee and hip compression and flexion, hip strength, hamstring length, strengthen the spinal flexion, balance, and then practice. How much time are you realistically putting into it? Because we get better at what we practice. If you're just throwing it in once or twice a week, are you really going to see the results? If you're really keen on the pistol squat, see where you can start to add it in. See where you can really start just tiny little changes in your movement practice that start to take you towards that goal.